In another life, I could have been that Nintendo 64 kid, because I grew up with the Sony PlayStation. But on my frequent visits to family and friends, I still had many hours under my belt playing Pokemon Stadium and WWF No Mercy. Now with a console of my own, I'm returning the favour when I have a handful of people over, with a nostalgic trip of Mario Kart 64. The unique 3 handles allow for different grip styles and button layouts to match certain games by moving to either side of the controller to take advantage of the Z trigger, a feature that would later become the Wii Remote and Nunchuck. Being a multiplayer party system, I use controller extension leads to have each controller reach the extreme ends of the room, otherwise the standard 6 feet cord has me reaching for the couch. But Nintendo's recently released Switch Online controller had me intrigued. Being able to play on original Nintendo 64 hardware with a blue retro adapter. I already had various wireless options, but unless they're shaped like the original, then the player misses out on that authentic experience that immerses one to the appropriate era of the console. So I scoured the internet to see my other options, and I'm happy to say there's a worthy alternative. This one was unbranded and advertised as having 2.4 GHz connectivity to a USB and original Nintendo 64 receiver. And the best part, I could buy it now for less than half the price than Nintendo's offering, coupled with the blue retro adapter. The box has no recognizable branding, but digging through an Amazon listing, they're made by Saffun. And keep in mind that I bought all of these products with my own money, and I'm not sponsored or paid to review any of these, so all my opinions are my own. Inside we have a spare analog stick, the USB and console receivers, a USB-C cable, which is a nice addition, along with the instructions, which explain the button combo to change pre-configured mappings, predominantly for the Nintendo Switch. And USB-C for charging means that I can use those magnetic detachable charging cords that Mark from My Life in Gaming recommended. So my first impressions of the controller were very good. It feels premium and just like an OEM controller. I like that it's also true to the original with a dummy memory pack, which probably takes inspiration from the Switch Nintendo 64 controller. I quickly found that although the stick feels tight, it doesn't ride along the octagonal gate like the original, and instead it sweeps around in a fluid circular motion, so it's missing that tactile feel. The D-pad is a little mushier, and each of the face buttons require ever so slightly more force before it starts to recede. Maybe because it's brand new when comparing to the buttons on the 26-year-old controller, but they still feel satisfying to press with the normal amount of effort you'd expect. Looking side by side, apart from the LED lights and a few extra buttons to accommodate for the Switch, I'd say that they nailed the original look. The weight distribution feels on point with the built-in battery and rumble motor without looking or feeling chunky like the original add-on.
That's a huge bitch!
The battery and rumble motor add about 20 extra grams to the original. The analog stick on the original controllers are notorious for wearing down, and I doubt this flaccid stick is any fun. That's what she said. Yeah, so this new controller shouldn't have that problem, being constructed more like a modern analog stick compared to the old and outdated design. I hadn't opened this controller before, and like I said, it is 26 years old, so I was expecting some grime. But I wasn't expecting a Tony Montana amount of grounded plastic.
Say hello to my little friend!
The controller is powered by a 3.7 volt 500 milliamp battery, which has an approximate 10-hour usage time and charge time of 2.5 hours according to the Amazon listing. The buttons and membranes feel decent, and the D-pad is similar to those used in almost all Nintendo controllers with the center nub. The buttons are actually fully interchangeable with an original controller. Not that you'd get this just to swap them out, but I can see Saffun were paying attention when designing these. And then here's the PCB, which is sturdy and again a great build quality for the price. It's always pivotal to test the analog stick, nice little pun there, eh? And I'm using Neo Team's controller test ROM on original hardware, which requires a press of the A button after the stick has been positioned at each corner of the octagonal gate. Then you can compare results to other controllers, and this one has slightly reduced diagonal range. So let's take it for a test drive with Mario Kart 64. And for the aspect ratio police throwing their arms up at the screen, This is a modified ROM that draws 3D objects into proper 16:9. 2D assets like weapons are stretched, but everything else displays in beautiful 16:9. Check out my widescreen CRT video if you're interested. First thing is to see if it can pass the in-game routine test, which I'm happy to report it does with flying colors. It'll interpret and send the button combinations that turn on certain functions in the RGB mod software, such as in-game reset and deblur for sharp pixels, all without leaving the couch. So buttons have a very familiar feel, and the analog stick takes those tight corners with ease. GoldenEye 007 static aiming proves the analog stick to be sensitive with a low threshold to register movement, but it never feels too sensitive that it stops me from hitting a target. The receiver's two-way switch toggles between rumble and memory pack, and the vibration is stronger than that of the Tribute 64's rapid burst pulses, but more subtle than the original rumble pack add-on. Memory packs can be inserted into the receiver, and just like the Tribute 64, you can't use both memory and rumble simultaneously. The receivers put further strain on the controller port, which can be remedied by a 3D printed bracket designed by Todd from RetroFrog. Or just use the Game Gear game. I tried to use the Game Boy transfer pack in the receiver, which wasn't recognized. But in fairness, it also doesn't work on the Tribute's receiver. The receivers do look pretty similar. I mean, there's only so many ways they can be fundamentally designed, and the Saffun receiver wasn't recognized by a Retrobit's update tool, so at least they were only externally similar. I was eager to see what kind of lag the controller had. As lag can be baked into the game's code, I benchmarked against an original controller as the baseline. I opened them up and soldered wires to ground and the A button pads, then joined the A button signals to each controller. So when ground is bridged to the button pad, both controllers simultaneously register the button press. Using identical characters, Liu Kang in the NTSC version of Mortal Kombat Trilogy, and filmed at 240 frames per second and further slowed down post, the wireless controller, which is the left Liu Kang, begins the punch animation on the exact same frame as the original wired controller on the right. This was consistent over several tests, concluding that there's less than a frame of lag, also expressed as less than 16 milliseconds. So that's the original receiver, but now for the USB. They should surely run on the same hardware and software, and being USB, I can use the Mr. FPGA's lag test core to produce solid numbers. Lewis from Zez Retro made an excellent guide for lag testing on the Mr. using an Arduino Pro Micro. I won't cover how it's built, but please check out Lewis's video by the link in the description. Pretty much how this works is the active and ground controller signals are connected to the Arduino, which is programmed using the code from Mr. Addon's GitHub. Power and ground signals are wired into the Mr.'s analog snack port, short for serial native accessory converter, which sends a button press to the controller, and then the Mr. waits for a button press from the controller's USB receiver to return, and then it calculates the round trip. I ran a few thousand tests, and the average lag was only 5 milliseconds, with a very low standard deviation, which coincides with my first test on the Nintendo 64, which I considered to be virtually and consistently zero lag. Very impressive. I tried out the controller on the Switch, and you need to press the reset button before synchronizing it to the USB receiver. A little quirk I noticed is that when I left the receiver in, it was always looking for a connection. So when I went back to using the Nintendo 64 receiver, I had to disconnect the USB receiver on the Switch to avoid an unwanted connection. Each of the different button mappings worked as intended, but I'll probably never realistically use it on the Switch or for PC emulation. But if the Nintendo 64 gets fully developed into an FPGA core, then this controller should have me covered. So just as I was wrapping up this video, I saw these awkward ass controllers on AliExpress. I mean, it's technically a Trident controller, and for $32 delivered, I thought I'd do the community a favor to see how much it sucks. It arrived loose in the box that it was shipped in, and straight away, this thing feels very cheap. I didn't realize it had no rechargeable battery, and instead takes 2 AA's. The D-pad feels a lot more stiff and clicky, which I'm not a fan of. The analog stick has an octagonal click, but it's similar to a GameCube stick. And then I realized that this has no traditional Z button. So with that and the offset analog stick, what's the point of the middle handle? The Z button is now L2 and R2, so you just hold it like a standard DualShock controller. But the questionable design choices keep on coming. Ever used a G-stick? Yeah, me neither. The buttons also feel ultra clicky and overall inferior quality. But at least it has a turbo function going for it, which works at a single moderate speed. This thing has a tiny rumble motor. I mean, I'll give them points for trying, but it gives the vibration a focal and localized feel. The internal build quality is what you'd expect, and keep in mind as I rip into this controller that it wasn't that much cheaper than the higher quality Saffun, but I'll still run it through the same objective tests. The stick's X and Y axis reach a value of about 127, which is far beyond the normal range of 90, which makes the octagon's reading nowhere to be seen on the screen's overscan area. And take a look how this translates in gameplay. In GoldenEye's menu, holding the stick down causes the input to alias and drifts the cursor up. When aiming, there's a large dead zone before registering any movement, where the desired analog values are compressed to the middle of the stick's range, therefore making this a nightmare to control. It failed the Liu Kang lag test, and when I say fail, I mean it's not essentially zero lag, but still very low to the point that it should be imperceivable to most. Overall, this ugly stick shouldn't even be given to your baby brother. And it kind of baffles me the difference that $12 makes to upgrade to the Saffun controller, who's obviously taken a lot of inspiration from the Nintendo Switch Online controller, but also didn't cut corners in quality. And it ticks all my boxes for a wireless Nintendo 64 controller. With the 3-handle design, built-in rumble, and essentially no lag, this controller is simply mwah. Now if they just make one for the Dreamcast.